An extremely fragile bipartisan $1 trillion infrastructure deal appears to be back on track after some damage control from the White House this weekend. Republicans were not happy with what they called a bait and switch from President Biden. Hours after announcing a bipartisan compromise Thursday, the president said his signature depended on the passage of a separate spending bill featuring only things Democrats support. But the president issued a clarification Saturday saying that he intends to support the infrastructure compromise already negotiated. Republican senators involved in the bipartisan talks say that they can now move forward on that bill. President Biden is scheduled to travel to Wisconsin tomorrow to tout the infrastructure framework. So for more on where things stand right now, I want to bring in Weijia Jiang and Nikole Killion. And Nikole, we're going to start with you. While Republicans who helped negotiate the bipartisan deal appear to be back on board, how are other Republican and Democratic senators feeling about the compromise? Is it likely to pass the 60-vote threshold?
That remains to be determined. And, really the devil is going to lie in the details. We still don't know what all is in this plan yet, just the broad sketches and outlines. So that will be key, but it will also be key to see whether or not Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell signs on. That will certainly provide a direction as far as Republicans beyond those who worked on this compromise. And he already, while he has given negotiators the room to craft this deal, once it was announced, he too kind of gave this speech on the floor where he said it kind of made his head spin as far as, this double track of having this bipartisan bill, but also this very partisan, bigger package that Democrats plan to push, pretty much echoing what you heard in Weijia's package there from Senator Barrasso, who is another key Republican leader. So I think, watching the Republican leadership on this, but also Democrats, progressives have made clear that they want these two tracks to operate together. They, of course, favor this bigger reconciliation package. And so they do feel strongly. In fact, we heard from Senator Sanders on social media last night, who said, despite what the president said, make no mistake, there can't be an infrastructure bill without this bigger reconciliation package. So I expect that will be an argument we'll hear from more progressive Democrats in the days to come. And so trying to weave those two sides together will be very critical.
So, Weijia, part of what the president had hoped to do is to sort of have a new definition of infrastructure that would include bridges and roads, but also, what he's calling human infrastructure. That portion of the infrastructure bill has been cut out, and what he had initially said was, he wanted the two separate bills passed in tandem. And then what we're talking about is how we sort of backed away from that. But still, this human infrastructure portion, he would like to get passed. Democrats would like to get passed. What is the White House's strategy to push both of these bills along, the regular infrastructure and the human infrastructure?
Well, the president had to first come out and clarify that it didn't have to be at the exact same time. That was what was different here, is that when we initially heard from him, he made it sound like if unless both bills were on his desk at the same time, he wasn't going to sign even the infrastructure compromise. And now he's saying that's not the case. So we probably won't see both measures happen simultaneously at the same time. There will probably be one after another, but certainly the negotiation will continue because he doesn't have a guarantee for the American Families Plan, just as we heard in my piece earlier, because there is this big divide over how much money to spend and over what should be in it. And we know that there are lots of Democratic priorities, especially with regard to funding for the climate changes ahead that are not all in the current package, as well as other things that could help American families throughout the way. And so there will be a robust discussion within the Democratic Party, since they're trying to use reconciliation for that, which means they don't need a single Republican vote. But it also means they need every single Democratic vote. So they still have to work out the price tag and what's in it. But as far as this compromise package, Republican negotiators have indicated that they do have the votes it looks like, in the GOP to move forward so they can get that to the president, because just like we've seen from the very beginning, it does include the more traditional projects when you think about infrastructure in that bill. And so, you know, it could be a big win for the president and for Republicans who can say that they were able to reach some sort of compromise on something.
So listen, Nikole, this other bill, though, that includes, child care and money for green energy, maybe, the Democrats have the votes to kind of get it passed, get it out of Congress and onto the president's desk. But what's the plan to pay for it? The bipartisan infrastructure bill, says there won't be any taxes being raised. You're just going to use a lot of money that was sort of left over from the pandemic. But what about this other half of the bill? How's that going to be paid for?
Well, I think that also is a very key question, and how much it's going to cost. We've heard this could cost upwards of $6 trillion, and that's on top of this $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure deal that's being crafted. So even some Democrats don't have the stomach for that amount of spending. And that will probably be the bigger debate that lies within, at least among Democrats, because again, you have more progressives pushing for, making this big, making this bold. Now is our time. It's a once in a generation thing. And so from that standpoint, the price tag could be anywhere from $4 to $6 trillion. But a more moderate Democrats are really signaling that they might not be able to go that high. So maybe the package has to come down to, let's say, 2 or 3 trillion, which means, the scope of this package will have to be narrowed. We know it does include things like, universal pre-K, paid family and medical leave, which are things that many progressives and even non-progressives, have been championing. But again, even those details, how this will be paid for, still has to be worked out. One thing I can say is there is a lot of concern, too, not only about the size of this package, but that it could contribute to inflation. We've already seen economists raise concerns about inflation. So again, adding on these extra trillions of dollars of spending, whatever it ends up coming out to, even if it is for progressive priorities, does raise concern about the ultimate impact it could have on the economy.
So, Weijia, you mentioned that the president's taking the show on the road, right? He's going to Wisconsin to sell his agenda. I'm just curious, because it's not like he's not the only president that does this. Donald Trump would do it as well. Do these kind of road shows actually work when it comes to drumming up local support for federal initiatives?
Well, based on what we've seen so far, it doesn't hurt, right? Because there was resistance when he was trying to pass the COVID relief package, for example, and he was able to say that if you look at the polling and you look at what we're hearing on the ground, there is bipartisan support, because they are pointing to both Republicans and Democratic voters out there in America who support his measures. And so the hope, of course, is to take the case out there, to make the argument for why people should support this and why they should let their lawmakers and their elected officials know that this is something they want the president to ultimately sign. And so if nothing else, it gives them sort of an argument to make when they say, even if it's not bipartisan on Capitol Hill, it is bipartisan in the real world outside of Washington. And that's what they're hoping to do, is to drum up this enthusiasm.
Weijia, Nikole, thank you so much.
Sure. You bet.